Hi everyone, hope you guys are all having a great day today, and in today's video I'm going to cover the whole entire market in terms of Dow Jones, Nasdaq, and S&P 500, including the economic calendar. Now I do post these videos daily, so I highly encourage you to double check the latest video on my channel so that way you get the most up-to-date information. And before I get to the analysis portion, I'm going to go over the economic calendar. And for Thursday, September 5th, 2024 at 8:15 a.m. we have ADP employment. At 8:30 a.m. we have initial jobless claims as well as U.S. productivity revision. And then we have U.S. United Labor Cost Revision. These are all for Q2. Then at 9:45 a.m. we have S&P final U.S. Service PMI for August. And at 10 a.m. we have ISM services for August as well. Now in terms of direction for the market, in my opinion, it looks like it's more downside. Again, this is all just my opinion. Please do own due diligence and research before buying and selling. But if I look at the MACD lines for all of them, S&P, Nasdaq, and Dow Jones, now we are levels. I'm going to go over this, but we are at levels that potentially could have like a dead cat bounce. The reason I'm stating more downside is if you look at the 1 year, 5 year, and the all chart for the MACD lines, this indicates if we're in a bearish or bullish movement. Looking at S&P 500, ETF SPY, which is the same thing, just different ratio. ETF SPY for S&P 500. But this is the MACD line. It's in the bearish movement. So that's for the 1 year chart. For the 5 year chart, we are in the bearish movement, but it got a even bigger pull to the downside. And then for the all graph, yeah, it's in the bullish movement, but it's potentially arching down. So for example, if you see this chart right about here, you could argue this dates back since 2010. So upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. You could argue some false breakouts here and there if you zoom in. And then there's a bottom level of support and then the major crashes as well. Another 2 drops. You could argue that this level won't be in play because there hasn't been 3 touch points yet. But if we go to the downside, you could argue we're coming down to this level potentially. Like we've seen multiple times. Yeah, obviously some false breakouts, so on and so forth. But there's been other touch points that are accurate within that touch point. But are we going to this level? I'm not saying we are. I'm just saying for the fact that the 1 year chart and the 5 year chart and then the all chart pretty much kind of point to potential more downside. And the only reason why I would say potentially that could happen is we've seen multiple times in history that when interest rates get cut by the Fed, shortly after that follows, for the most part, it's not guaranteed, but the market does tend to drop. When will this happen? It's hard to tell. But interestingly enough, for example, the S&P 500, right about here, this was the all-time highs previously, and we got to that level multiple times and could not pass it. So this was back in July of 2024, and then right about here is August of 2024, and then the last time we touched it was basically, September 3rd of 2024. And then basically got pulled down, and then indications are pulling to the downside. Now, again, short-term wise, there will obviously be potential dead cat bounces or so on and so forth, or a reversal a little bit, and it might seem like we might be going up, but maybe ultimately getting pulled down. The reason why I'm saying maybe ultimately getting pulled down is you never know what the news could be. For example, NVIDIA stock, it's a mega cap stock. We've seen it getting pulled down recently, but if they have some crazy news where the stock goes up, I don't know, potentially 20% in one day, that will be enough to pull the markets. And if we have multiple days like that, I'm not saying we will or anything, or if it's possible 100%, but if we have multiple days like that, that could be enough to reverse all the negative downside pull indications, right? And then in terms of levels, again, this is looking at SPY. We closed at $550.95. Again, ETF for the S&P 500. And we're at a level potentially to have like maybe a bounce, but not necessarily a full bounce in my opinion, but like a dead cat bounce. And let me just draw a quick line extension. So it's not a great line extension, but we've dropped down at that level before where we're at right now, the 550. We've seen multiple bounces at that 550, so right about here, and it goes across as well where we saw resistance early on, right? So there was resistance, and then there was a bounce right about here too as well. So, and then the resistance too. So this level does come into play, but we'll see what happens. And we're at the 1 year moving average, not 1 year, but at the 1 year chart, you can see we're at a moving average that we could potentially bounce off of. But again, in my opinion, with this indication, with the 1 year and the 5 year specifically, it looks like further downsides coming. And for the fact that rate cuts tend to have a market pull down right after. So we'll see. But again, with the Dow Jones also, same thing, right? We're looking at the 1 year, and it's about to cross over to a bearish movement right about here. And then for the 5 year, technically you could argue it's not going to be coming down, and I believe the all is up still. So for the Dow Jones, it's a smaller sample size. It's only 30 30 companies, but this one would potentially indicate that maybe we might have a pull up to the upside because they are more bigger cap stocks, right? And again, like I stated, if something happens where enough pull happens, then the S&P will have a reversal to the upside. But for the Dow Jones, we've been at the all-time high. So previously it was in July of 2024, and we've kind of tested it again, but then did have false breakouts and got pulled down. And then for the Nasdaq's a little bit different. Here was the all-time highs back in July of 2024, but this upward trend resistance line dates back since 2010. So I'm going to visually just show right about now. And we went up, mind you, the market was still going up. It's just every single time we went up to this upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010, we get knocked down, go back up, get knocked down, broke through in 2020 to 2022, but came back underneath, had issues passing it, did pass recently, but then came back underneath and has had issues ever since. So this is the line. We've consolidated around this zone right about here where we saw support and resistance and been dropping. And then that line since 2010, you could argue, for example, there's been cycles where we'd go up to it and then somewhat come down to this level right about here a couple times, 1, 2, and then 3 arguably, but we usually come to the mid zone and we're pretty much high up right about here. So you could argue we could probably start coming down to the mid zone. And then for the Nasdaq, it's the same thing as the S&P. So here's the 1-year chart, MAC line to the downside, MAC line as well indicating further downside for the 5-year chart, and then for the all, just like the S&P, potentially crossing down to the downside. Again, this is all just my opinion, so please do own due diligence and researching before buying and selling. I do have levels to go over, but it depends because with these drops, sometimes they can be drastic and then just break through all these massive levels. That's the only problem. I would say potentially if you're looking for a decent bounce, if we were to drop dramatically, arguably you could expect to potentially come in within this range zone, but again, you almost have to assess it day by day. In case it starts slowing down, then I'll start covering these levels again. But right now, I don't think it's really beneficial to cover these levels right now for the time being. But that's basically it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. I do appreciate it. If you did find it beneficial, consider dropping a like. It does help with the channel, so thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it. And if you want to be notified when I upload my next video, because I post these daily, consider following and subscribing to be notified when I do upload them. And thanks again for watching. Take care. God bless and peace.